Okay, so now we're going to talk about these selections by bell hooks. Okay, you have them. I'm not going to go over them in great depth. I'm going to go over certain ones in greater depth than other ones because you are going to have a lot to read already. And if one article speaks to you more than another, you can focus on that article, certainly in relation to your fourth reading response. But the articles, I've labeled them all here. I'm turning to the slide here where I give you information on, where is it? Liberation scenes and reflections on race and sex. I focus most of my attention in the PowerPoint on the other two. So I wanted to just give you some basic information about these two. In Liberation Scenes, she begins by talking about Lorraine Hansberry's play A Raisin in the Sun, and then about remakes, film versions of it, and the problems that are raised. And this is showing you these roots of intersectional analysis, not in a legal context, but in a literary, not just literary, but partly literary, and partly gender studies and women's studies context. A theme here, and also a term that she's giving us here, is counter-hegemonic cultural production. This is what she's using Raisin in the Sun as an example of in order to show problems that some of pop culture's renderings and representations of Black people tend to produce. So even though Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, she argues, is a counter-hegemonic cultural production, she says that often counter-hegemonic cultural productions, say that 5 times fast, come with contradictions, that this play evoked possibility of moving from one set of class values to another, that individuals could basically climb the class ladder, that there could be movement, and pose challenges to capitalism, maybe exposing and posing challenges to capitalism. And then I have a quote here. The contemporary revisioning of Hansberry's play made it, so this is like basically turning it into A Raisin in the Sun into a film, made it no longer a counter-hegemonic cultural production, but a work that fit with popular racist stereotypes of Black masculinity as dangerous. So you have a filmmaker that takes a play that is functioning as a counter-hegemonic cultural production, and somehow it's reduced and changed to becoming not even a counter-hegemonic cultural production, but a work that fits with racist stereotypes of Black masculinity as dangerous. That's the problem she's pointing out here. And it's one that I want you to be thinking about in films that you've seen. Whether they are functioning as a counter-hegemonic cultural production, or they're doing the opposite or doing something else. She talks about how the film is made primarily accessible for a white mass audience. So this brings up issues of the white gaze, and it's something that I want you to be thinking about. And as we move toward watching the more recent film Black Panther, I want you to be thinking about how that gaze is disrupted, and if it is, and how it is. And then another quote. Racial integration changed Black response to the culture industry and to cultural production. That collective critical Black gaze developed in the context of resistance to overt racist discrimination was altered as barriers were crossed with media coverage of Black civil rights struggles. So another key point from this article. And lastly, from this article, when white critics write about Black culture because it's the in subject, without interrogating their work to see whether or not it helps perpetuate and maintain racist domination, they participate in the commodification of Blackness. So a white critic needs to be considering the work that they're doing and whether they are participating. And that might not just be in what they're writing or what I would write, but where I'm writing it for and how that entity is either maintaining racist domination or not, like decolonization efforts. If I write for a magazine and I write a poem and it's published in a magazine and it's on the subject of discrimination, and that magazine has as a company, discriminated against people, that is a problem. Like, I need to think about the context of my work, and she's urging critics to be doing that too. Something to think about if you decide to do some kind of work of criticism for your final project. Then this article, Reflections on Race and Sex. I'm just going to give you a couple of key points from the articles, and then I'm going to talk about these two. Race and class have always been overlapping discourses. So again, you want to see these origins and someone else working with intersectionality, but while not calling it intersectionality, this is it, from bell hooks. Race and class have always been overlapping discourses in the United States. That discourse began in slavery. Black women's bodies were the discursive terrain, the playing fields where racism and sexuality converged. So she talks about gendered metaphors, rape as a terrorist act of conquest, powerlessness being associated with impotence. Another main idea here. Oppressed black men and women have rarely challenged the use of gendered metaphors to describe the impact of racist domination and or black liberation struggle. So this is another quote from bell hooks. And another point. Sexism has always been a political stance mediating racial domination, enabling white men and black men to share a common sensibility about sex roles and the importance of male domination. This is a really key point in moving toward these other articles and in thinking about the Two Live Crew controversy. In the True Live Crew controversy, interestingly enough, though, white men were targeting black men as somehow having a different notions of sex roles, that's where the racism is coming into play, because the objectification of women, of black women's bodies and of white women's bodies, is something that white men have the biggest part of. And so for them to be white men to be criticizing black men for this is where a lot of that racism arises and is exposed. Okay, so please take a look at these. All right, now, in the article, Representations, I have lots of quotes, I have lots of questions. They're very important and interesting article here that I hope that you will at least look over most of this week. So in this essay, she writes, bell hooks, I want to focus on feminist responses to black men and black male sexism. Since many black men believe that feminist movement threatens to erase their voices, to usurp focus on racial oppression, it is in the interest of the feminist movement to examine the negative implications of attempts to censor their work or to overtly condemn a particular group of men. So she begins this whole thing by talking about having a feminist white woman friend conversation with about a black author, Ishmael Reed's book, Writin' is Fightin'. And the white feminist friend dismisses the work, basically saying because he's a misogynist and he's considered terribly misogynistic. And bell hooks is troubling this because the dismissal is part of white women's kind of responses to black men and to black male sexuality that have some roots in racism. So the essay itself talks about the problem of censorship within the feminist movement. So just like the outright dismissal of the work as misogynistic then might ignore the contributions it might make in other ways that might have to do with race. And so it also is part of this legacy of dismissing and passing judgment on black men's work. And that's what she wants to problematize. So it's about the reactions by white and feminist audiences to writing by black men and failure to read work by black male authors. She's trying to combat this a little bit here. And criticism of having work just casually and brutally dismissed rather than read and critiqued in depth. And she focuses on feminist responses to black men and black male sexism. So I pose these questions for you to be thinking about. In what ways does this essay anticipate or speak in conversation with Crenshaw's essay and work? What do you think? How is what bell hooks is saying here, criticism she's making, what she's problematizing, how does that fit into the Two Live Crew discussion? What is the importance of and are the implications of this part of conversations on intersectionality and the study of gender and pop culture? Like, so what, when we have difficult conversations about white women's treatment of black men's work, why are, how are these part of conversations that we're having now? How can you relate what you're reading about to situations in your own lives and your encounters with pop culture? And how is this issue that Bell Hooks is raising in representations, with her focus on feminism and its relationship with black masculinity, how are these issues raised on film and in television and on social media? How are filmmakers and directors and writers and people on social media addressing this issue or contributing to this conversation? I know that people on Twitter have a lot to say all the time. I'm seeing about it, like critical things and looking critically at representations. And so the main example that I'm focusing on here that Bell Hooks focuses on in the article is on the film The Color Purple. This works really well for me because Alice Walker's The Color Purple is important to me, and the film is important to me, and it's one of my favorite films. But Bell Hooks is problematizing Steven Spielberg's film. I mean, Steven Spielberg as a white film producer doing this film made certain choices that Bell Hooks is critical of. So I have a couple of quotes that we can unpack here. Much of the public debate about Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple, focuses on whether the portrayal of black men as brutal misogynists was accurate. He, and the character here being Mr., I should probably pop that in here because it's not apparent with the selection, moves from being a brutal male chauvinist to a compassionate, caring person. Walker's shift in representation is rarely acknowledged. So what's being said here by Hooks is that in the book, and Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, the character of Mr. shows a transformation of character, that he learns, that he grows, that he changes. And the film, Spielberg's film, doesn't do this. Instead, it plays up on his violence and doesn't show that transformation. So the other quote I have here is, completely overshadowed by Steven Spielberg's cinematic interpretation of the novel, audiences seem to forget Walker's position. In the film version of the novel, Spielberg did not choose to graphically portray Mr.'s transformations. Instead, he highlighted images that readily resembled existing racist stereotypes depicting black masculinity as threatening and dangerous. This is the issue that she takes with The Color Purple in the film. And it's certainly a really important critique of this film, of this very important film. So on the next page, I have a little clip from The Color Purple of the scene where the sort of early part of the film where the sisters are separated. And I want you to watch that if you can. It's just a little clip. I've thought about assigning this film and watching it in class. We certainly just didn't have time to put it in, and I wanted to include Black Panther. But these ideas, I want you to be thinking about what Bell Hooks says in this article in relation to the clip that you watch, even though it's just giving you one little short idea of it. But keep this quote in mind. Spielberg's representations of black men cannot be dismissed as though it has no political implications. As though it is rooted in neutral artistic choices. It has the political impact of transforming Walker's text into a one-dimensional frame where black males were depicted in a conventional, stereotypically racist Hollywood manner as brutish and animalistic. So this is the main issue within the film, is that this underlying racism of the film reduces Alice Walker's character, takes away his transformations, and basically amplifies stereotypes that are racist stereotypes about black men. The other film that she looks at, this is our other article. Okay. Whoop. All right. Last article. We're almost done. There's only a couple of slides here, and I've got like 5 minutes left. So, in Spike Lee doing Malcolm X, which is also called Denying Black Pain. And I want you to be thinking about films. We talked about wounds, images that wound. What about images and films and representations that deny Black pain? She offers us a very complex analysis, an intersectional analysis that looks at class and race in the film, in Spike Lee's film, Malcolm X. And so I'm going to start with this quote. This is Bell Hooks' words. Today, market forces and white supremacist capitalist patriarchy have found a way to use Malcolm X to drain the radical message of a dynamic, living activist into an abstract icon, to replace radical content with pure image. So she's coming down hard on Spike Lee's film, which received much praise because it is a film by a man of color on Malcolm X, and so it received a lot of support under this assumption that because a black man makes this movie, that there won't be problems with it. But she interrogates that notion and demonstrates that it's not just about Spike Lee's race, that the fact that he's embedded in a Hollywood that is racist, in a Hollywood that is geared toward a white audience, that affects the way that the film is made, and also brings the white gaze into the picture. Okay, so I've given you here a link to the trailer for Spike Lee's Malcolm X. Please watch it. Please be thinking about it as you read this article. I think you'll find these two, of the 4 articles, I think you'll find these 2 the most engaging because of the film analysis that goes on. But the next slide I have is titled The Commodification of Images of Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. And I have 3 quotes here from page 156 from Bell Hooks, Spike Lee doing Malcolm X. The first quote: "The power of Malcolm X's political thought is threatened when his image and ideas are commodified and sold by conservative market forces that strip the work of an all-radical and revolutionary content." So really, she's putting this criticism out there that is all about, what did Malcolm X stand for? What did he work for? What were his causes? What was he struggling for? And how does this film address those causes? Not just in what's going on the screen and how his ideas are represented in the images on the screen, but in the market in which this film, in the place in which this film is being marketed, in the audience. If this film is feeding into an industry that goes against everything that Malcolm X stood for, that is a problem. That's the problem that she's trying to get at here. The second quote is, "Understanding the power of mass media images as forces that can overdetermine how we see ourselves and how we choose to act." These are ways for you to take Bell Hooks' ideas, theoretical ideas, and apply them to other contexts and to other pop culture contexts. And then the third quote: "Malcolm X promotes and encourages the development of a critical black gaze, one that would be able to move beyond passive consumption and be fiercely confronting, challenging, interrogating." So I want you to be thinking about other forms of media, other representations that challenge us to move beyond passive consumption and to be fiercely confronting, challenging, and interrogating. What can you think of that does that? This is something that we've talked about in other theories and other contexts all along, like in challenging the male gaze, for instance, and subverting it, in taking it apart and destroying it. And I think this is the last slide here. Spike Lee has to create a work that would address the needs and desires of a consuming audience as predominantly white. So this is the big point here, that Spike Lee was, while making efforts to be true to representations of a Malcolm X and to honor Malcolm X's life and work, is also having to work for a capitalistic consuming audience of white people. And how does that impact the film? And she does criticize ways, the tragic sort of end, the painting of Malcolm X as having a sort of tragic end, which certainly he did have a tragic end in one sense of being killed and murdered, but tragic in the sense of like represented as like things falling apart and problems happening like that. She's criticizing as being not true to life. So also making a spectacle of his work. She critiques that as well. I ask some questions here. What are the implications of commodification of Malcolm X for a primarily white consumerist audience? In her analysis, Hook suggests that the film becomes an example for other films that carry the messages that there's no other place for black militant political rage in Hollywood. Because by like toning down the core messages of Malcolm X in order to make it marketable for a predominantly white popular audience. How is intersectionality operating in Hook's interrogation of this film throughout the essay and chapter? That's the last question that I ask you. Okay, so now, moving on to this reading response. I've sent you the reading. I'm going to send you the reading response when I send you the links to this. But I want you to take a look at it. You're going to be basically, the assignment is I've given you Kimberly Crenshaw and Bell Hooks have provided us with commentaries on the use of intersectionality as a tool. Think about what interests you from the readings and from our class discussions on or relating to intersectionality. Write a reflection on the subject of intersectionality addressing both of the following questions. How can you apply intersectionality to something that interests you within pop culture representations of particular communities? And why is intersectionality helpful or necessary? So I don't want answers. When you write this as scholars who are understanding deeply this analysis. Now you've read about it. Now you've learned about it. Don't just give me boxed answers of why is intersectionality important. Really give me examples. Why is this life-changing stuff? Why is intersectionality so radical and so important? In the Two Life, Crew case, we have an example of that has real consequences on people's lives. If you think about those images that wound, they actually hurt people. They re-traumatize people. They continue legacies of racist violence. Then why, what does intersectionality do? Why is it so necessary? What does it do? Please, as specific as you can. I also gave you optional sub-prompts. If you want to do something more specific, I give you one for each of the articles. And you can do those, and you can incorporate them if you want to be more specific. But I wanted you to also have the open-ended, because this is the last reading response. I wanted you to also be able to just write it open-endedly if you don't want to have to be too specific. And then our last project. I'm losing time here, but please let me know if you have any questions. I'm so excited about this. I don't want this to go any longer because it's going to be so hard to upload it. But read it. Let's just do that, okay? Because I think I've written it hopefully in a clear way, but this is a very open-ended project. I know you're going through the coronavirus. I know you're homebound, and I know you're going through all sorts of things, and some of you are losing loved ones, and some of you might have sick loved ones, and so use this media literacy project to do what you want to do with it, and you have my full support, and just let me know if you have questions. I think that's it. All right, I think that's the last time I'm going to make a lecture for you this semester. I just want to tell you that I miss all of you. I wish that we were together in the classroom, even though I am loving being with my girls, certainly. But I do miss you, and I miss our work together. And I hope that you felt like, I think we've done a good job at maintaining the integrity of our coursework. I am proud of all of you. Your reading responses for the last reading responses were truly wonderful. Showed great insight. I was extremely impressed. I'm printing out many of them because I want to keep them because they're just so impressive, and I'm really proud of you. And I hope that you're doing okay, and I hope that you get through this. Just keep doing your best, and I'm going to work with you, and I will help you through this as much as I can. And you've done the majority of the work for the class, so if things fall apart, you're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay, hopefully, and I think that's it. I'm going to let you go now. Okay. Hopefully we'll do our Zoom, so I'll get to see some of you, but if not, this is the last time. Come see me next semester. If we're back in classes as normal, come find me, come say hello. I'm sure I'll be writing recommendation letters for some of you, so take care.